So hold on to that if that's your question. I know it was asked a couple of times. So let me ask you this, Don. Okay. My question is in regards to Luke 2:52. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. My question is, how can Jesus grow in favor with God, becoming a friend of God? If Jesus is God, how can Jesus become? Is he not already a friend of God? Are they not both one? Luke 2:52.
No, good question, and that's one also where you could also cross-reference that with Hebrews chapter 5, where it said he learned obedience too. I think here's what we're dealing with in Luke 2:52 and Hebrews 5 and the such like. We're dealing with something that we've had no other example of this in history, where the living God becomes a human being. You've got one person, but two natures, 100% human, 100% divine in one body. As God, he cannot grow, he cannot learn, but as human, he can grow, he can develop, he can learn, he can grow in favor of God and humans, and that's exactly what he did. And what it talks about favor of God is by his obedience. Again, Jesus emphasizes the fact he does always those things that please the Father. So you have to read this in light of the fact that God becomes a human being in the person of Jesus Christ. He obeys God, and he gains favor as being, as trusting him as God the Son, but also as the perfect human being. Now, what's interesting, 1 John 2:6 tells us we're to pattern our life or walk as Jesus walked. And if Jesus did everything totally with respect with his divine nature, that wouldn't be real encouraging to you or me, would it? Because we're not deity, we're not divine. But the fact is, he is fully human, and as a full human being, he trusted God the Father. He grew in stature, he grew in wisdom and human wisdom, he did, and yet he grew in favor because he obeyed God the Father. Now, I don't know if you ever thought of it this way. I remember I heard a pastor say this once, I thought it was really brilliant. Remember when Jesus was baptized, you had the Trinity there together, God the Son being baptized, God the Holy Spirit coming down. Luke tells us on him in a bodily form as a dove. But then the voice of God the Father said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Notice God the Father was pleased with Jesus right then. Pleased with what? Not pleased with his miraculous works. He hadn't performed any miracles. Not pleased with his teaching. Hadn't taught anything. Pleased with 30 years in obscurity of living in total faith to God the Father. Pleased with the everyday, day in, day out task that he was given until it was time to reveal himself to the world. So God the Father was pleased with us just being consistent without doing anything spectacular. And that got me when I heard that. I thought that's really profound, because the pleasing of the Father with Jesus was his obedience, and he was obedient until the death, even the Philippians 2 tells us, the death of the cross. And so as a full human, 100% human, he could grow. And he could. And grow in knowledge, he could grow in stature, and he could also grow in favor with God. And that's exactly what he did. The favor increased as he was completely obedient to God the Father in his life.
Good. This is a combination of two questions, from one of which is my son, and one of them is my son's friend.
Okay.
So the first part is, when God made Adam and Eve, how old were they? And then the second part is, how long were they in the Garden of Eden?
That's two really good, excellent questions. When God made them, how old were they? Well, the day he made them, they were 1 day old. I mean, that's how old they were, right? I mean, now the question probably is, how old did they look? I think that's usually what's asked. God created Adam and Eve as full-grown adults. Now, what's a full-grown adult? I remember one time on the radio a number of years ago, a young lady called up and said, "When we get to heaven, will we be, will we be kids like I am now, or will we be full-grown adults?" I said, "We'll be, when you get to heaven, you'll be a full-grown adult." She goes, "Wow, when I get to heaven, I'll look like I'm 16." And I thought, I guess it depends on one's point of view what a full-grown adult is. When you're 8 or 9, I guess that's full-grown adult. But anyway, they probably looked, fully grown, 25, 30 years of age, something like that. We don't know. We're not told, bottom line. How long did they last in the Garden of Eden before they sinned? Well, let's put it this way. Not very long. Yeah. It's probably highly likely this is possibly the first or second day. It didn't take long for them to sin. Now, you're going to think that's not real good, and we're not really happy with that. In fact, Gail Irwin gave the illustration the other day. he said there's going to be 2 long lines in heaven. One line is there to, to worship Jesus. The other line is to beat the snot out of Adam, because of what he's done, because he's caused all this problem. People be lining up to do it. Now, but here's the thing. Let's face it. If it was you or me, we would have done the same thing sooner or later. Don't think, oh, if I were there in the garden, yes, you would have. Yes, we all would have. We all would have. Adam was there. He represented us, but we would have done it too. But the fact is, it's already done. It's been there, and probably not real long. Probably weren't long in the garden. They didn't have any children since they were created perfect, and they were told to be fruitful and multiply. We assume that Eve would have conceived right away, and so given that fact, it probably didn't take long for them to fall, as it wouldn't take you and wouldn't take me very long either. Okay, great questions. I love them from the younger ones. They're always the tougher ones, the better ones.
I want to give those of you who did not have a chance to or did not know about writing down a question, if you would like to ask a question, don't be bashful. I'm going to bring the mic. Would you mind coming up so we can get you on the video and blackmail you?
We're on tape here now, video too.
That's right. So behave.
Yeah, no. He's going to behave. Smile at the camera.
I'm just kidding. My question is in reference to the question that came out, and somebody believing and then falling away from the faith. Are they saved? And I know that in the book of James it's talking about the demons believing, and even the demons believe and shudder. So is it a legitimate statement to say that that person probably wasn't in the faith in the first place if they did fall away?
Oh, that's a fair question. It's a good, and the bottom line is we don't know. And that's the key. We really don't know that person really did or did not believe. The Bible talks about false prophets. Remember that among us? And there's also 1 John 2:19, I believe it is, where it says they went out of us because they weren't with us. If they were of us, they would have remained with us. One of the keys is that false prophets and false teachers will come into the church. They will pretend to be Christians, say the right word, say the right thing, but then eventually leave because they're wolves in sheep's clothing. So your question is well taken. Is it possible these people never believed in the first place? They didn't have the faith. They may profess Christ. And I'm sure that's true in a lot of cases. The problem is we don't know who's whom. There are also people who profess Christ, fall away into sin, but then come back as the prodigal son there. And the good, here's the great thing. I'm glad none of us have to judge that. Aren't you glad that you don't have to judge people's hearts? When I started this Bible study, or I was one of the leaders of it in 1970, we had a bunch of young kids that had just come to Christ. And I remember looking at the people walking through the door, and there were certain people who were just outstanding believers in Christ. I thought, God is going to use these guys, these gals in some mighty ways. And there were others that walk in the door, and I said, I'll give them about 3 weeks, and I'm never going to see them again. Well, guess what? It's the 3-week people that are still standing with the Lord, having some of the most wonderful ministries, and the guys and gals that could never fail, they failed, and we haven't seen them again. So I don't know. We can't tell. We don't know. God is going to be the judge there. But the question James is talking about is a whole interesting issue there in James chapter 2. And there's different ways of looking at that, right? The demons do have faith in the sense they know that the Lord exists, but they don't have any relationship with him either. You can acknowledge intellectually that Christ is God the Son. In fact, there are many people that do that. There's over and over. I'll give you an example. There was, when he did the Bible study there long ago, there was a young lady who was taking a class at one of the local universities, and she had to ask me a question after the Bible study one night. She was just dumbfounded. She said she had this class in classical Greek, and somehow they got around to talking about Jesus and the resurrection. And she was listening to the professor's explanation, and it sounded like someone who actually believed that Christ came back from the dead. So she said she hung around after class and said, Professor, you just talked about, Jesus coming back from the dead, and it sounded like you really believe that that's what literally occurred. And he said, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think the evidence is so overwhelming that, of course, he did come back from the dead. And she says, well, pardon me for saying so, but I've been in your class all semester, and you never impressed me as a Christian, And he said, well, I'm not. And she said, wait a minute, you just told me that you believe that Christ came back from the dead. He said, yeah, but you're not a Christian. No. Do you realize the consequences you will suffer? She bluntly asked him that. Yes. And she said, why not? Why aren't you a Christian? And he said, I don't want my life changed. I'm very happy with the sinful life I'm living right now. All right. Well, okay. So he knew the facts. He knew it was true. You know, all the demons believe they know it's true.